Endeavour launches once again. 4 astronauts from 3 countries on Crew 2, now making their way to the one and only International Space Station.
Space travel has always been a fascinating industry to the public. New innovation in space travel fills headlines and makes its way into pop culture, whether it's successful or not. While previously the ability to travel into space was reserved for wealthy nations with vast resources, who could still only sporadically travel outside of the atmosphere, this is not the case anymore. Space is becoming more attainable. Most universities have some sort of satellite program that sends instruments into orbit, and private companies fund their own manned missions. With this increased availability of space, we are beginning to see the emergence of a new industry, space tourism. While previously this had been an industry imagined to be futuristic and far off, it's now becoming a reality. Dreams of vacationing on the moon or taking trips out of the atmosphere to glimpse at Earth from space now seem plausible. Like many science and technology fields, the space industry seems to be developing faster than the laws that regulate it. To fully understand laws that govern space, we have to go back to 1957. It's at the height of the Cold War and at the beginning of the space race. This is when Russia launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite to be sent into orbit around Earth. Prior to Sputnik, there had been little conversation about how space laws would work, and most countries assumed they would essentially be an extension of airspace laws. The space above a country would belong to that country. Sputnik pushed this conversation to the forefront and forced us to ask an important question. Who owns space? Realizing the vast potential of space exploration, nations began negotiating the rules that would govern space. In 1967, the Outer Space Treaty was formed in the UN. The treaty states that no country may claim a body that's not Earth. These laws function similar to our governing of international waters. It also stipulates that the use of space and space exploration must benefit mankind as a whole. Countries may own the vessels they send out into space, and astronauts are still subject to the laws of the country their ship is from. So unfortunately, space may not be this lawless frontier it's often portrayed as in science fiction. But by far the most important aspect of this treaty at the time it was signed was that the US and the Soviet Union agreed to ban storing weapons in space, an important step during those tension-filled times. Now, as the space industry modernizes, this out-of-date focus of the treaty is becoming more pronounced. The treaty mainly focuses on disarmament, and is not detailed on the rules that would govern space tourism or space mining. Most importantly, it only governs the actions of governments, as during the time it was signed, the idea of private space companies seemed impossible. This provides a loophole for private companies to justify mining in space. Let's fast forward to 2015. US Congress passes a law allowing US citizens to mine for resources in space. And companies begin developing technology to mine resources such as platinum and helium-3 from the moon. While many scholars argue that this violates the Outer Space Treaty, the language of the treaty is vague and very out of date. As more and more companies enter the industries of space tourism and space mining, there's a serious need for updated space laws. Countries do not want to stifle innovation by limiting who has access to space, and many scholars are of the mindset that space law will develop as individual court cases arise, believing it's too early to establish laws that would be effective in the long run. However, while we are just beginning to scratch the surface of the possibilities of space travel, in the long term, we also must recognize the potential for conflict and exploitation as we venture into untouched space. If we allow the space industry to continue advancing as it is now, we may end up with a few powerful individuals benefiting from the resources in space, while scientists and everyday citizens are left behind. While this issue may not seem important right now, it must be addressed before it becomes a bigger issue.